Hey, so, funny story. It turns out my house was designed by Cardassians. And while I was setting up the camera, I accidentally triggered an automated security program, and I'm running out of time to finish this review before the release of Lethal Batman Villain Gas. So let's get started, huh? All right. This is a review of the Star Trek Deep Space Nine episode Civil Defense. If you have not seen this episode and you don't want to know what happens in it, be warned. Spoilers beyond this point. Newsflash, Cardassians are bad, and they built death traps into their space station to put down worker revolts and didn't bother to disarm them when they left. I know. I'm as shocked as you are. O'Brien and Jake are in one of the station's abandoned ore processing facilities working on converting it to a deuterium refinery because I guess in the 24th century, deuterium refining is the industry of the future or something. Commander Sisko drops by for a visit, and moments later, Jake and O'Brien trigger a hidden Cardassian computer program, which mistakenly identifies them as Bajoran workers rebelling against their Cardassian overseers and begins imposing increasingly draconian security measures that pretty much fuck up the entire day for everyone. A recording of Gul Dukat appears on a monitor, imploring the Bajoran workers to surrender to their Cardassian masters or else drastic measures will be taken. Since it's been a few years since either Cardassian authorities or a captive Bajoran labor force have been on the station, this presents something of a problem. Sisko tries to trick the computer into letting them go by pretending to be the leader of the non-existent revolting workers and announcing his surrender, but that only works for a couple of minutes. When the computer notices that no one has actually surrendered to anyone, another recording of Gul Dukat pops up to say, "Okay, you had your chance, we're just gonna gas ya." Sisko, Jake, and O'Brien manage to escape thanks to Jake crawling up a chute and opening an escape hatch, but the effects of the security program are being felt throughout the entire station. Because the revolting Bajoran workers have managed to escape the ore processing center, the entire station is being locked down, all doors sealed by force fields. Quark and Odo are trapped by a force field in Odo's security office, and the rest of the senior staff is stuck in ops. Gul Dukat appears on the monitor again to announce that if the rebelling workers don't immediately surrender, poison gas will be released into the station's habitat ring, killing everyone. Major Kira is like, time to stop pushing buttons and start shooting buttons, and she blasts some door controls with her phaser. Bashir manages to get the door open, but it's no good because a force field immediately activates to block their exit. Dax tries to bypass some circuits in one of the computer terminals and get zapped by another force field, injuring her hands. Then Garrick shows up. He has a personal access code left over from when Cardassians rammed the station, which allows him to get past the force fields, but that's it. He can't shut the force fields down or gain enough computer access to do anything but monitor the situation. Meanwhile, Odo and Quark are still stuck in the security office, and Odo tries to comfort a spiraling Quark by assuring him that he is the most devious Ferengi Odo has ever met. It's a really nice thing to say, and you can tell it means a lot to Quark. Elsewhere, Sisko, Jake, and O'Brien have climbed up a chute into another room, some kind of loading bay. O'Brien's like, just think of all the Bajorans who worked in this satellite loading bay, just polishing switches to make their way. There's a door leading out of the bay, but of course it's sealed shut. They try ramming it open with a mine cart, but that doesn't work. There's a bunch of leftover ore laying around, so Sisko's like, isn't this stuff explosive? Couldn't we pack a bunch of it against that door, ignite it with the power cable from that light, and blow our way out of this room? You mean like in the pilot episode of MacGyver? Exactly like the pilot episode of MacGyver. Do you see what a great plan this is? Back at Ops, the gang has decided that their best option to prevent the release of poison gas throughout the station is to destroy the life support system. Doing that will mean everyone suffocates when they run out of oxygen in 12 hours, but that will at least give them more time to figure something else out. So Kira grabs her phaser, says, "Attention Bajoran workers, move your asses out of there," and once those crew members are clear, she shoots the computer console that controls life support. It works. No more poison gas threat, but it also triggers yet another stage of the security program. Gul Dukat appears on the monitors again to announce that, regrettably, the Bajoran workers have taken control of the station, leaving him with no alternative but to just blow the whole thing up. The station's self-destruct program has been activated. Things go from bad to worse, again, when Garrick tries to break into the computer using Gul Dukat's access code. Garrick fails, and the security system responds by using the replicator to materialize a phaser which begins blasting anything that moves. One poor bastard is vaporized almost immediately, though he must not have been too popular, since nobody else seems to give a shit, and the rest of the crew is forced to cower under tables and behind consoles. Then, Gul Dukat beams in. Hey, it's the guy from the monitors! The Attention Bajoran Workers guy, damn, he's like famous! Dukat, clearly amused by the whole situation, explains that his ship was on patrol in the area when he received a distress call from himself, alerting him to a Bajoran worker revolt on the space station. Dukat notices Garrick hiding behind a computer and has a good laugh. Garrick, deducing that the replicator phaser is programmed to not shoot Cardassians, stands up to face Dukat, and the two of them intensely exchange exposition for a minute before Kira cuts them off like, "Can you have an argument that fills in your backstories later, maybe?" Using his access code as former commander of the station, Dukat deactivates the replicator phaser, but he's not ready to cancel the self-destruct quite yet. First, he has an offer to make to Major Kira. After sitting down behind Commander Sisko's desk and flicking the baseball to the floor, for me, the moment the character crosses the moral event horizon and becomes irredeemable, Dukat tells Kira that he will abort the self-destruct and save the station if Kira will agree to allow him to deploy a detachment of his troops to reestablish a permanent Cardassian presence on Deep Space Nine. Kira refuses, so Dukat's like, "Well, you think about it. The station's set to blow up in half an hour, so I'll go back to my ship now and come back in, 25 minutes later." But when Dukat tries to beam back to his ship, a recorded message from some other Cardassian dude, presumably Dukat's boss, pops up on the monitor to say, "So, trying to beam out while the station is under siege by Bajoran workers, eh, Dukat? Abandoning your post after failing to maintain order? I always knew you were a coward. Well, guess what? All your access codes are hereby canceled. There's nothing you can do to stop the self-destruct, so you're just gonna have to stay there and die with everyone else. Have fun exploding, sucker! Peace!" Well, now they're really in trouble. They still might be able to interrupt the self-destruct sequence if they can shut down the station's main power reactor before the countdown hits 0, but they can't do that from ops. Someone would need to get to a control room on Deck 34, and they can't leave ops because of all the force fields. Dax says we can't waste time trying to deactivate one force field at a time between here and that control room. We need to find a way to shut down all the force fields at the same time. Kira's like, "Good idea, just tell me which computer to shoot." It turns out the Cardassians had power boosters installed to make the force fields lethal when they ran things on the station. Because they didn't want force fields strong enough to kill people, just fry the shit out of their hands apparently, those power boosters were deactivated when the Bajorans and Starfleet took over, but they're still in place. Being deactivated, they're not affected by the security program. So, Dukat rewires a control panel and manages to use those power boosters to short out the power all over the station. The plan works. Dukat's like, "Once again, the day has been saved by the unbridled cruelty of the Cardassian military. You can all thank me in your own time." All the force fields have been shorted out, except for the one around Odo's office, because apparently the Cardassians really didn't trust Odo. Which makes it seem kind of strange that they made him their chief of security, but whatever, moving on. Sisko, Jake, and O'Brien have managed to blow their way out of the loading bay, and now that the force fields have been shorted out, they are in the best position to make it to that reactor control room and prevent the self-destruct. Only one problem. The power surge that killed the force fields also caused an explosion that caved in the hallway between them and the control room, so they'll need to crawl through a maintenance tube to get there. Only one problem with that, the maintenance tube is on fire. Sisko's like, "Oh, for fuck's sake, they're really piling it on in this one." With no other choice, other than getting blown up, I guess, Sisko and O'Brien tear off their sleeves and make little mittens to protect their hands and crawl through the burning maintenance tube. O'Brien only makes it part of the way before getting knocked unconscious by the fire and smoke and explosions and whatnot. Jake climbs in and pulls him to safety, while Sisko reaches the control room at the other end of the tube and manages to channel the energy from the overloading fusion reactor out into the station's shields, preventing the reactor from exploding and saving the station. The force field in the security office finally deactivates, but Quark's not happy. He snuck onto Odo's computer and read his own security file, which indicates that when Odo said Quark was the most devious Ferengi he'd ever met, he was only blowing smoke up Quark's ass to make him feel better in the face of their imminent deaths. Quark's like, "So you just lied to me because I was trapped in security with you?" And Odo says, "You don't get it, Quark. You weren't locked in there with me. I was locked in there with you." The end. This is one of my favorite Deep Space Nine episodes, and as far as plot-driven stories go, I think it's one of the best written episodes of any Star Trek series ever. The script for Civil Defense is credited to Mike Crone, though apparently it underwent rewrites by multiple series writers before going in front of the camera. Whoever deserves the credit. It's a script that could be taught in screenwriting courses as a prime example of how to build drama and ratchet up tension by introducing a threat and then relentlessly escalating that threat. This is not a character-driven episode. There's excellent character work sprinkled throughout, some very fine moments between Sisko, Jake, and O'Brien, Quark and Odo, Garrick, and Dukat. Dukat in particular has one of his best episodes here, but the drama of Civil Defense is rooted not in its characters, but in the situation and their increasingly desperate efforts to overcome that situation. The threat is introduced as somewhat of an annoyance. Sisko, Jake, and O'Brien are trapped in the ore processing facility. There's the somewhat comical touch of the recorded messages from Dukat issuing orders to Bajoran workers who aren't there. Imagine how much fun Dukat must have had recording those messages, right? Probably did like 10 takes for each one. Play that last one back for me. Did I put enough mounting exasperation into "Attention Bajoran workers" that time? Do you think? But Sisko, Jake, and O'Brien's repeated attempts to thwart the program fail, and each failure increases their jeopardy. First, they're locked in, then they're exposed to poison gas, then, when they manage to escape through the chute, the security program and the threat it presents expands to the entire station, and now it's everybody's problem. And the pattern continues from there. They disable life support to stop the poison gas, which triggers the self-destruct. Garrick tries to break into the computer using Dukat's access code and triggers the phaser in the replicator. Dukat shows up, expecting to save the day, and finds himself trapped by his own security protocols, turned against him by an old commanding officer who didn't trust him. Sisko, Jake, and O'Brien escape being trapped in one room, only to find themselves trapped in another. They escape that room, find out they have to get to a control room to stop the self-destruct, find the most direct route blocked by a cave-in, and find the only alternate route on fire. Every evasion of an obstacle is countered by an even greater obstacle. Every attempt to neutralize a threat only results in an escalation of the threat and an increase in the urgency of the predicament. The episode doesn't merely trap our heroes in a tough spot and have us watch them try to escape. It deals them reverses again and again and continually makes their situation worse. Only Odo and Quark are allowed the relative luxury of remaining in the same basic situation from the start to the end of the crisis. Sure, they'll blow up just like everyone else if the self-destruct isn't deactivated, but their immediate circumstances in the security office don't get any worse once the force field seals them in, which is fine because their scenes are mostly comic relief to give us an occasional breather from the tension. The episode expertly balances drama and tension with humor throughout, not just in the Odo and Quark scenes. While the crisis on the station is played straight, there are a few nods of acknowledgement at the underlying absurdity of the situation. For me, the highlight of the show comes when the real Gul Dukat shows up. He thinks this is all very funny, and has even more of a swagger than he usually does as he magnanimously turns off the replicator phaser, then makes his preposterously presumptuous offer to Kira to deactivate the self-destruct in exchange for being allowed to deploy his troops to the station. But Ducat's overconfidence collapses in on itself when he realizes that he is now trapped, along with everyone else, and in an instant he goes from hero in his own mind to fool. It's the perfect use of Ducat. Give him room to strut around a bit, bask in his own glory, and then, once he's thoroughly convinced himself that he is, in fact, king shit, pull the rug out from under him. Mark Alaimo does some of his best work of the series in the scenes after Ducat finds himself stuck on the station, as he struggles to hide his mounting desperation and maintain his facade of being cool, calm, and in charge. His reaction of shocked embarrassment when Garrett calls out his attempts to flirt with Major Kira remains one of my favorite Ducat moments. Garrick! How dare you pants me in front of the girl I'm trying to impress? As a lifelong fan of MacGyver, I'd be negligent in my critical duties to not single out Sisko, Jake, and O'Brien's escape from the loading bay for special praise. Like I said in the summary, it is very similar to a scenario from the pilot episode of MacGyver, and I mean that as a compliment. And naturally, if you're gonna do a riff on MacGyver in a Star Trek episode, you should have O'Brien on hand, since of all the major Star Trek characters, he is the most MacGyverish. What makes the MacGyver scene work is that you understand what the heroes are trying to accomplish and follow their attempts to accomplish it. Sure, they live in the future, and they're using a fiber optic cable to ignite a pile of imaginary ore, but all of that easily translates into real-world terms. They're using an explosive material they found on hand to blow a hole through a door. We get it. That feels real. The only significant flaw in the episode for me is that the resolution to the crisis doesn't have that same sense of realism. It does up to a point. Sisko's way is blocked by fallen debris. The tunnel he has to crawl through is on fire. Those are very practical, tangible obstacles. But when he makes it to the control room, his actions switch from tangible to something more abstract. He saves the day, essentially, by pushing the right buttons. Avery Brooks does his best to invest his actions with some drama and urgency. He works that control panel like a pro, and he incorporates some business with computer control rods, which he removes from their slots and examines and rearranges, trying to look like he's performing meaningful work in a big hurry. But there's no getting around the fact that we in the audience can't follow what he's doing, because what he's doing doesn't actually mean anything. We're just watching someone push buttons on a computer console. It's the physical equivalent of technobabble. It's disconnected from our real-life experiences. It's impossible to follow what he's doing and how close or far he is from accomplishing what he needs to accomplish, and therefore, it lacks dramatic weight. Does it spoil the episode? No, not even close. It's just that after watching the peril of these characters be built up so skillfully, it is a letdown to see all that tension get blown off in such a flat and underwhelming fashion. But if that's the worst thing I can say about it, and it is, that must mean Civil Defense is a pretty great episode. And it is. It takes full advantage of what an interesting location Deep Space Nine is, presenting it as a place that is still hiding some dangerous secrets, turning the entire station into a death trap where every attempt our heroes make to escape only makes things worse. They are able to survive and ultimately escape the trap by choosing, reluctantly but boldly, to go for the least undesirable option at every juncture. Wrecking the life support system isn't a good thing, but it's better than allowing poison gas to kill everyone. Short-circuiting the power grid won't cancel the self-destruct, but it will create the opportunity to avoid disaster later on. Sometimes success is the result of being smart enough to choose the failure you can survive over the one you can't. And I mention this for no particular reason, though I do feel compelled to remind my fellow Americans among you that we do have a presidential election coming up later this year. So, those are my thoughts on Civil Defense. What do you think of this episode. Please share your thoughts with me in the comments. If you'd like to support this channel, and I sure wish you would, if you can afford it, you can do so by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Steve Shives, becoming a channel member by clicking the join button, or by making a one-time gift by clicking the thanks button, or via PayPal or Venmo. Links are in the description. Next week, our survey of Star Trek bottle shows continues as we hang around Deep Space Nine for one more week and take a look at an episode from near the end of its 5th season, In the Cards. See you then. Thanks for watching, and take care, everybody. Oh, shit. You know what? I just realized it didn't lock me in. I could have just left.